Welcome, everyone, to Creating End of Year Emails, where you're going to hear all about the playbook for getting an email created and sent and wowing all of your customers and getting in front of executives as well. Just a quick call out. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please ask them, and you can do so by dropping it in the chat or using the Q&A functionality, all of which can be found in that Zoom bar that pops up. So with that being said, I'm going to pass it off to Sheldon Spring, who is our host for this webinar.
Thank you so much, Bex. And first and foremost, thank you everybody for coming to this webinar today. I know it's a really busy time of the year. We were just talking about end of year, but really, appreciate everyone making the time to join me today and talk about end of year emails. So a little bit about myself. My name is Sheldon Spring. I'm part of the technical account management team at Matic. And prior to working at Matic, I actually was part of the implementation consulting team at Box. So basically in my day-to-day role, I'm working very closely with our customers to create a lot of content that is data rich and really focusing on the concept of ROI as it pertains to our customers' customers. So how can we use the data that they have and the data that they work with to really showcase ROI and really showcase the value of their products. Sweet. So before jumping into end of year emails, I did just want to take a moment to pause and talk about Matic and what we do as a company. So for those of you that maybe are not aware of our company, we are a automation company that helps with the process of creating what we like to call data rich or data driven content and presentations. So normally prior to implementing a tool like Matic, this process can be fairly manual and fairly labor intensive in the sense that you'll have your employees have to manually go to various data sources, take screenshots, and then upload those screenshots or manually input certain data points into a presentation or a piece of collateral. Matic really helps to streamline that process by using, queries and in some cases AI-powered insights to help populate information and data on a more automated basis. So whether it's a Google Slides presentation or a PowerPoint deck, Matic can really help automate and sort of streamline that process. And we've recently incorporated AI into our platform. So really, taking the automation step to the next level by having AI help with this process. We also have a feature that allows for the send out of these data-driven content or data-driven presentations as part of an email or as a PDF attachment to an email. So, all right. Jumping into the agenda, we have a couple of different segments today. I think, firstly, really understanding the why behind end of year emails, a really important step for many things, but especially something like this, where you're going to be dedicating, time and effort across multiple teams. It's very important to outline the underlying reasoning for taking on this type of action. And then the majority of today's session is going to be centered around a playbook. So the step-by-step of what ideating and then actually creating an end of year email looks like and how to take on that step process in a thoughtful manner. Very exciting, but at the end or towards the end of today's webinar, we're actually going to go through an exercise where you'll be able to create your own end of year email leveraging AI. So we'll talk about how to do that then. And finally, we'll have a couple of minutes at the end of the session today dedicated to Q&A. So any questions that you have, about what we cover, as Beck said, feel free to post them in the chat or in the Q&A module, but we'll also have dedicated time at the end to kind of address those questions. All right. So like I said, very important step for many things is understanding the why of doing it in the first place. So it's probably news to no one, but given the current state of business today, a lot of sectors are really becoming much more, they're placing a high level of scrutiny when it comes to the tech stack that they operate with. a lot of economic decision makers and people who sit in positions of power at companies are taking a look at the tech stack that they have and wondering, why do I even need this product? It's a question that I definitely hear a lot in my day-to-day role as I work with our customers, but it's a valid question. And end of year emails serve as a very, very effective way in making a case of value for your product or service offering at your company. And I would say it really sort of comes at the perfect time. End of year, a lot of companies are going through budget conversations and they're really, reevaluating their tech stack. And so end of year emails can really be kind of the final piece to a value statement or a value narrative that your company is trying to propose, and really kind of sealing the deal when it comes to, keeping or retaining your company as a partner with your customers. End of year emails really fall under this theme that we have identified entitled hyper-personalization. And to kind of double click into that, hyper-personalization is taking the next step when it comes to generating content and customer-facing collateral that is pertinent to your customers and the value that they are trying to derive from your product. So, I think personalization is something that has continued to exist for quite some time. An email saying, hello, blank person's name. Thank you for leveraging our product at blank company. We know that you have X number of seats with our tool. Here's where you can work with us to schedule a meeting. Effective in a sense, but I think to really stand out and really sort of continue to drive value and prove value, I should say, there needs to be a level of personalization that goes a bit deeper than just sort of this surface level, account level data. So it's important to kind of talk about and define what hyper-personalization is. So as I was saying, it's a way to stand out and grab people's attention, right? By having metrics, by having data points that really tie more so to the usage data, maybe of the company that you're speaking with, or even better, ROI. These are ways that you're able to stand out from the rest of maybe the tech stack that you're working alongside or competing against and get people's attention. It's also a way to maintain or keep people's attention and by telling a narrative or providing, once again, data points that really resonate with the company that you're speaking with. So thinking about, okay, which data points are going to speak most clearly to the audience that I'm trying to speak to is super, super important and a part of hyper-personalization and part of the thought process in creating an end of year email, which I'll talk about in just a bit. And then another really important aspect to hyper-personalization is it's a way to motivate and guide the recipient of, say, an end of year email or the recipient of some sort of presentation to their next action, what it is that you want them to do. Maybe it's book a meeting with your CS team, or maybe it's click on a link embedded within the email to see some of the new features or product offerings that your company is providing. Hyper-personalization really grabs the attention, keeps the attention, and then drives somebody to take on some sort of task or course of action that you want them to take. As I was referencing earlier, I think it's also good to note what hyper-personalization is not. So kind of the email example I was using earlier, where there's sort of simple copy and paste for different pieces of information about the company into an email, is not super, it's kind of become run of the mill, I would say. It's what a lot of emails today include. And this is more so superficial personalization. Personalized to a sense, but it's not really telling a story. It's not driving a narrative, and it's not grabbing the attention of the audience that it's being sent to. And so once again, end of year emails are great because it provides hyper-personalization at scale. Depending on the audience that you're sending out these end of year emails to, it's a really, really great way to just showcase hyper-personalization to each of the recipients that you're sending to, really showcasing that narrative and showcasing those data points in a way that's normally very fun and really sort of stylish. I think that's the second point here. It's fun and it brings delight to customers. I think in going through an end of year email process, it can be very enjoyable to work with a marketing team or a design team to really figure out and flesh out the design of the end of your email and add kind of a fun twist. I think a really good example of this is Spotify. They have the playlists that they do at the end of the year, and it's very hyper personalized and very fun. So figuring out a way to kind of mirror something like that or take components of that and employ them in your end of your email, I think is really a great way to kind of make it different and creative. And lastly, it gets the attention of executives. So executives, C-suite team members, these are people whose calendars are very often super booked. They are very pressed for time, and it can be difficult to schedule time with them to hold maybe a fully fleshed out business review meeting. An end of year email can serve as a way to still showcase the value and the use case for your product to a very important individual at a company, ultimately a decision maker, without having to take too much of their time from their schedule, their busy schedules. And we've actually seen a lot of success with this at Matic, so much so that when we performed an end of year in review email and sent it out to some of our customers, one of our accounts, which is a fairly well-known review company, their CEO reached out to our CEO and basically let us know that, hey, I had no idea, the value that your product is driving. And in fact, we should be paying you guys more money, which I think is, probably one of the best responses you could garner from an end of year email campaign is a customer saying, actually, we should be paying you more. So I just wanted to share that anecdote to say that these can be really effective tools and really effective resources and collateral if performed effectively. All right, the bread and butter of today's presentation is the playbook, or a set of steps and actions that you can go through with you and the various teams at your company in order to create a holistic and robust end of year email. So we've consolidated it into 4 steps. And while this may look fairly simple, I will say that each of these steps has coinciding substeps beneath them, which I will cover in the following slides. But similarly, or as previously mentioned, defining the who and why is an important initial step. You're then going to want to figure out and sort of filter the email content in terms of what types of information you want to present. Then you're going to go through the task of actually launching the email, figuring out the best way to do that, performing maybe some testing or experimentation on that front. And then lastly, a very important step, and one that I think gets overlooked often, but it's after the launch, taking all the information that you're able to gather from the email campaign or campaigns, and basically taking that information back to review it for future iterations of the email campaign. So firstly, we have defining the who and why, ultimately getting alignment on why it's worthwhile to run this campaign and get access to resources. Email campaigns can take a varying level of work across multiple teams. So before even embarking on this journey, it's important to figure out, okay, who is going to receive these emails and why are we even taking this action in the first place? So firstly, for the identify who to send to and figure out the why for them, this is, right away, you have an opportunity to perform a level of hyper-personalization. This question of, do we want to send to all of our customers or do we want to send to just a subset of customers? I think in and of itself is a hyper-personalization question, because the answer to that question is then going to lead into, okay, how do we want to segment them? Is it by SKU? Is it by company size? Is it by regions? And ultimately, the answer to this will lead into the types of information that get put into the email itself. So, there's pros and cons to there's pros and cons to deciding to send to all of your customers versus just a subset of them. But figuring that out and really deciding upon that is going to be step number 1. And then shortly thereafter, why are we sending the email? What sort of action do we want to drive, or what sort of takeaways do we want the email to have for the recipients that we're sending to? Maybe it's that they're doing a really great job with usage. And so we want to encourage them to check out our new features because we think it could really grow out the use case that they're already, or that they already have a great foundation with. Or perhaps it's, hey, we've seen a recent dip in usage numbers or an adoption for this specific feature. Feel free to leverage this link in order to schedule time either with our product team to provide feedback or your CS manager to talk about ways to maybe solidify a new use case. So figuring out who the email gets sent to and then figuring out sort of the why behind it, those are going to be very, very initial steps that need to be taken. Then the latter half of this step is to define success and then get buy-in. So success can be defined in a multitude of different ways. And I think a lot of metrics can come either from the specific emails that you're sending out themselves or at a business level. And I would say too, it's usually a conglomeration of the two or aspects of the two that really sort of build out a business case for taking on this sort of action. So at the email level, right, we have things like open rate, click-through rate, bounce rate. What are maybe some hard thresholds that we're trying to hit when we send out this initial email campaign? And if we do manage to get these or meet these thresholds, what is sort of the next step or next action that we're going to take on? At a business level, product usage, renewal rate, expansion rate, NRR, these are things that can be tracked both pre-send of the email campaign and post-send. So any sort of difference or change to these values is going to, potentially bode well for the validity of email campaigns or kind of showcase where there can be more work done in order to refine this process. So both of these things, or both of these realms, I guess, provide different metrics that can be utilized. It's just a matter of figuring out which ones you want to pick and pull from in order to showcase to your other teams at your company that, hey, email campaigns, end of year reviews, they're really viable in terms of affecting, this specific metric. And here's why we should be trying to take them on. Or maybe it's, we know our open rate currently is X%. We feel that in engaging in this type of email campaign, we are going to be able to get our open rate up to, this percentage. So, and just to reiterate, this is important because as we'll talk about in some of our future slides, there's oftentimes a lot of collaboration that goes into creating an end of year email. So the more buy-in you're able to get, the easier the facilitation of that internal process will be. All right. Step 2, once you figured out the who, the what, the why, it now is the task of creating the email content itself. So this sort of action that needs to take place, or this process that needs to take place between bridging the gap of the ideal state, pie in the sky sort of version of your email template, and what is actually possible by taking a closer look at what exists today within your data infrastructure. So step number 1, coming together, brainstorming with various teams and ideating on the best case for the email campaign. On the left of the slide here, we have what we have termed the Maddox hierarchy of data, which is to say that at the bottom here, we have account data. This is sort of standard information around maybe the number of licenses that a customer has with your product and, just sort of low level, I would say, information about their environment and their enterprise. Above that, or a step above, is usage data. So this is actually the number of people that have, accessed a specific feature of your platform or logged in, the number of times they've maybe worked with a specific SKU. So this is definitely, I would say, a bit more geared towards creating personalized content, driving a narrative, etc. And then at the very pinnacle of the pyramid, we have ROI. So taking that usage data, also factoring in, maybe what's important to the customer in terms of value, and then combining the two to really showcase, hey, this is pertinent to you, this is valuable to you because it's directly contributing to X, or it's directly contributing to your bottom line. So each of these is important, I think, to have within an end of year email campaign, but understanding how much of each or how much you want to include of each section is going to be important when it comes to, once again, creating that pie in the sky model. Once you have that pie in the sky model, I think the next part of the exercise becomes, okay, how much of this can we actually accomplish with the data that we have today? So aligning on the real version, we have this very funny meme here that says, I don't always get what I want, but when I don't, I get what I need. So I think an important takeaway here is that just because you may not have all of the data, the information present to create that ideal end of year email campaign does not mean that that should deter you from creating an end of year email campaign in the first place. I think major sort of theme across this webinar is that end of year email campaigns, any sort of, campaign is very iterative in nature. And any place that you start, whether it's an end of year email campaign that's, primarily usage data versus maybe ROI, or it's even, a lot of account data, that's a great place to start because you're going to have learnings from the experience that you can then apply to future iterations. And if you don't have access to the information today in order to get that ideal scenario, having an email campaign and being able to run it, have metrics from it that you can then take back to your teams internally could very much open up the possibility of more access to data to get those ROI metrics. So all of that to say, start with kind of what you really, really want, and then cull it down, filter it out, and figure out, okay, what can we do realistically today to get an email campaign or end of year email out to our customers? Implementing best practices, there are quite a few. We have them called out here on the left. I won't go through each and every one of them, but I think it's important to take into account what some of the important details are when sending out an email campaign. Emails themselves seem very simple, and oftentimes they are, but there are quite a few details to them. And so making sure that you are accounting for all of them and really sort of refining each of these aspects, especially if, maybe you're not able to incorporate all of the data that you would like in your first run through. I think really nailing down some of these sections is going to be super, super important in terms of getting that email to be clicked into and opened. And then, as I was saying, in terms of email campaigns in general, an iterative process, but even at this stage in the process, you're kind of figuring out what the content's going to look like, how it's going to be formatted and presented. If you are speaking internally with your teams and there isn't resounding agreement about a specific component or a specific detail, it is completely okay. And in fact, I would encourage A/B test it, that you have the opportunity to figure out if a specific subject line works better for a segment of your customers versus, an alternative one. So sending out one to a portion of your segmented recipient list and another one to another set of users, or excuse me, a set of customers will be a great way to tangibly see, okay, this subject line performed better against its competitor. So I would say, try your best to take into consideration all of these bullet points. But then if any of them are a little bit unsure, if any of them, raise a few concerns across the teams that are working on this, then A/B test it out in the wild and see which one fares better. All right, you've done all the work to figure out the why. You've figured out who you're going to be sending it out to. You've worked really, really closely and held multiple discussions about what content is going to actually be surfaced in this email. You know how you're going to basically format it and design it. Now, one of the biggest steps naturally is actually launching the email and making it happen. So before you're able to actually send the emails out, defining and determining the timeline is very, very important for multiple reasons. I think as the graphic on the left shows, there is sort of a prime period of time where an end of year emails may be most effective. But outside of that, I think it's also super, super imperative to determine timing in order to work backwards and figure out when we should start this process. When should I, maybe reach out to our data team and reach out to our marketing team and come together to figure out what this email is going to look like. You want to give yourself enough time to go through those types of conversations. So if the goal as this graphic shows, is to send out the end of year emails on the first half of December, then you're going to want to give yourself probably a month to a month and a half's worth time to start compiling all the necessary components. So just to kind of double click into it a bit more, beginning of November, a little bit too early, it's not quite the end of the year. Maybe this is a good time if you know that there's a company that you work with who maybe approves budget earlier, but usually a little bit too early. Then you sort of come into the latter half of November. We have the holidays. People are not checking their inboxes. They're not going to be looking at emails. So not a great time to send. Beginning of December, most relevant. People are back from their holidays and are, usually trying to get as much work done before the latter half of December, which is also holiday time. Not a great time to send an end of year email for the same reasons that the latter half of November is not a great time. And then January, I think we're pushing into the realm of it being a little bit too late. Could still feel relevant, if we get it out early January, but definitely something that may hold a little bit less weight at this point in time for companies in their budgeting. And then the latter half of January usually is too late at this point. Economic decision makers, they have already taken a look at their tech stack and have started to make decisions about what should stay versus what should be removed. And so sending an end of year email at this point in time, it's a really great effort, but it's almost, not quite enough at this point. So once the timing has been determined, you figured out, okay, we have an idea about when our customers have their budget conversations, when they're really taking an internal look at their tech stack. It then becomes, okay, we have what we want to be included in the email. How can we then source that data or those metrics from the data sources that we work with? And in this slide, there are a couple of examples, but obviously there are many, many more data warehouses or places where data can reside. Ultimately, this is going to be so important when it comes to figuring out, okay, data team, data infrastructure team, we want to have an end of year email that has these pieces of information. What is going to be the best way to source that information from, say, a Snowflake or a Tableau? And are there differing timelines perhaps with sourcing information from these separate data sources? Figuring out that is going to then tie back into the send out time in terms of, do we need 2 weeks in order to get the data ready? And how is that going to impact maybe our beginning of December timeline for send out? Once the data is ready, it becomes this question of how do we then transfer it or upload it to the emails themselves? So are we going to do a bulk upload versus syncing? And are we going to use merge variables perhaps to really try and streamline or quicken the process? After the data piece is sort of outlined and carried out, then it becomes, well, what is the delivery methodology? Are we doing a one-to-many model where we have a service account perhaps or sort of a standard email address for our team that we're going to have all of the emails come from? Or is it more of a frontline send out where we're having the maybe CSMs at our company send them out to customers directly? Benefits to both, but once again, an important detail to iron out. Bonus ways to stand out. I read this as ways to incorporate hyper-personalization, but custom PDFs, right? Is this something that we can incorporate some way, perhaps with our design team? Can we have a way to have data perhaps surfaced in these custom PDFs? And then data visualizations themselves. Can we have it within the email? Doesn't need to be included as an attachment. Sort of figuring out ways to, once again, really drive the personalization forward. So we're not looking at an email that's primarily superficial personalization. And then lastly, deving it up. Is this going to be something that we are working internally, perhaps with an internal tool to accomplish, or are we turning to a third-party vendor to help us facilitate this process? Tracking metrics, testing, and then enabling and training, these are so crucial to ensuring the success of an end-of-year email campaign. You could have the most beautiful, the most data-rich end-of-year email campaign, but if you go to send it out and there isn't any sort of plan around tracking metrics or testing it out, or even, enabling your go-to-market teams on how to speak to the metrics, then you're really kind of shooting yourself in the foot. Being able to track the metrics and figuring out where all that information resides is going to directly tie into the fourth and final step of this process, but super, super important to ensure that you understand where that data is residing or where it can be accessed. And then informing your GTM teams that this sort of campaign is going to take place is super helpful, and not only in enabling them and making sure that they're able to successfully assist with this campaign, but also enabling them to act as a means of sourcing feedback directly from your customers. So, there's information that you can gather from the metrics of the emails themselves, very quantitative, usually in nature. We have, click-through rates, open rates, what have you. Very important to have and take into account. But alternatively, there's a lot of value that can be derived from more qualitative feedback. And this is where your go-to-market teams are really going to play a role in sourcing this information. So whether it's, having your CSM reach out to a really trusted customer and have them provide feedback directly, or, having them be sort of included in the email itself as a resource for people to reach out to on their own. This is a really great way to source feedback and gather, helpful information about your email campaign. I will say at Matic, we've been able to partner really closely with some of our key customer accounts, and this information is super, super helpful and was super helpful for us when we were fleshing out our email campaign. All right, and then the fourth and final step is post-launch or after the launch. You've just been able to launch maybe your first email campaign or another email campaign and are feeling really, really good about the results. But, in order to iterate and make sure that future email campaigns perform just as successfully, if not more, it's important to take what you've learned and really apply them to the process overall. So as part of the Get Learnings sort of step-by-step, we have figuring out how the email performed against metrics. Way at the beginning, and one of the first steps, we talked about how it's very important to outline the metrics that you're going to then define success on. So in this regard, figuring out or resurfacing what those metrics are, and then comparing the actual metrics from the campaign against these metrics is going to be super helpful. Were we able to maybe hit the goal open rate that we had for our email campaigns? Yes or no? If not, maybe what are some of the factors that contributed to that, and how can we take that or take those learnings, those findings, those discoveries, and apply them to our next email campaign? Which is kind of what the second point is listing here. So hypothesize on what worked and what didn't. Again, experimentation, testing is key when it comes to email campaigns. There's always opportunities to take a look at what worked, what didn't, and then directly apply your learnings. So that's what this second point is listing here. Listening to customers, what were some of their responses and feedback? Very, very qualitative information is helpful from customers, because ultimately this is the audience that you are catering to, right? So if you are better able to understand maybe why it is that they decided to click on an email versus why they did not, that is something that you can apply to another segment that you send an email out to versus, the ones that you sent to the first round. So once again, being able to source this feedback and learning directly from the people who are your intended audience, I think is super vital. And then lastly, asking customers what they thought of email and if it was helpful. So be it a direct outreach from a CSM in order to get this information, maybe it's a post-email survey, whatever the method in order to garner this feedback, you're going to want to get people's thoughts around the email and sort of tweak future emails based on that. All right, and then ultimately, can take all these findings once they have been reviewed and assessed and sort of analyzed, can take all these findings and apply them to a crawl, walk, run model. At Matic, we really enjoy this sort of terminology to showcase, how wherever you're at in the process, there's always room to grow and there's always a way to get to sort of the run portion of the progression. So within the crawl section, we have the opportunity to send out end of year email campaigns or email campaigns where the process is fairly manual. You know, you're manually pulling data, you're uploading it into these email templates, and you're sending it out that way. There are sort of infrequent learnings because just of the frequency of the emails being sent out, you know, on an annual basis, there isn't as much feedback there. And because maybe the emails themselves don't contain as much either usage data or ROI data, there's minimal wow. I just want to emphasize that if these are the findings that you garner from your end of year email campaign, do not be deterred. This is usually the starting point for many companies, and it's just a matter of figuring out what can be done to optimize the process moving forward. So, you know, is it working more closely with your data team to gain access to more content? Is it working more closely with your marketing team to come up with an email design that's really catchy and sort of drives people to click on it? Any sort of starting point is a good starting point, but did just want to call out that this is, you know, this is the crawl sort of section of this 3-step model. The second step or the walk portion is sending email campaigns on a quarterly basis. So maybe you're still manually pulling some of your data, but you've gotten better, or the company that you're working with has gotten better at populating information more automatically so that you don't have to, there's not as much lift involved. There's frequent learnings because you're sending these emails out on a more regular basis. So you're able to perform that get learning step, that sort of internal analysis step more often. And the emails themselves, you know, they're coming in to the inboxes of your customers, but they're serving sort of like passive check-ins, you know, kind of driving towards action, but maybe more so just providing metrics to showcase, you know, usage and really having that be a touch point within the customer facing process. Still super effective, but maybe not entirely what could be done or performed with these emails themselves. Lastly, we have the run section, which is sending email campaigns out on a monthly basis. So this is the most frequent of the three, and it's primarily being driven by automated data pools. I think, you know, moving away from having to manually upload and insert data to more of an automated fashion directly ties to the feasibility of sending things out on a more consistent basis, because there isn't as much work being done in order to create this content. But the other aspects to this are there's frequent learnings. You have monthly emails being sent out. So the metrics that you can derive from those monthly emails really start to build out a trend or a model that can be looked at and showing, you know, the value of end of year email campaigns, and maybe, you know, certain things that worked versus certain things that did not. There's also active correction. So because you're sourcing so much information from your customers and the intended audiences, you're able to then apply that information directly back into the end of your email campaigns that you're working on. Excuse me. The final thing I'll note here is that the frequency, you know, is very much dependent on the business case that you have at your company, right? You could have a quarterly basis for sending out emails, and that could be considered a run. You know, it doesn't have to be something that occurs on a monthly basis. If it makes more sense for your product or your service offering to provide these touch points on a quarterly schedule, that is completely fine. I wouldn't get too tied down to sort of the time basis of these different sections. It's more so figuring out a way to, once again, you know, make the process less of a hurdle for your internal teams, maybe making it more automated, and then also figuring out the best strategy when it comes to design and formatting and subject line, you know, all of those details that'll really kind of push your email campaign into the run section. All right. So now that we've talked all about the process behind ideating an email campaign and actually going about the process of creating one, we wanted to take some time during the webinar today to actually walk through an opportunity to create your own sort of starter email template using AI and using aspects of hyper-personalization to get a starting point for this type of collateral. So I don't know if Bex has already. Bex, would you mind? Okay, perfect. She put the link to the end of year email creator in the chat. So if you would not mind clicking on that link, you should be directed to a web page that looks just like this one in this little screenshot. And then you're going to want to click on the create my email button. So I will showcase it on my side in just a moment, but you'll be asked to provide some pieces of information. And then once you have been able to provide all of the pieces of information, you'll be able to generate a end of year email template that you can access and actually download the HTML for moving forward for a few days. So to showcase what this looks like, let me reshare my screen. All right, so if you clicked on the link, you should have been redirected to this web page. And as I mentioned, you're gonna wanna click on the Create My Email button. Once you do so, you'll be asked to provide a couple pieces of information, like your name, your company website. So I'm gonna choose Matic, and then your company's name. And once you have provided all of those necessary inputs or sections, you're going to click on next step. And here's where you're going to be prompted to create a new email. So if you don't already, if you don't already have an account on Matic, if you do have an account on Matic, feel free to do the login section down here. But for the purposes of illustration, I'm going to create a net new email. And a helpful hack is if you put a plus sign and then any type of word after the initial part of your email address before the sort of at section, you can create an alias for your email. So I just said Sheldon plus webinar1@matic.io. I'm gonna choose in password. And then I'm going to agree to our terms of service, agree to our privacy policy, and click on sign up. In doing so, I'm immediately redirected to this page here, which is reviewing the branding of actually Matic.io website. So to give a little peek behind the curtain, essentially the AI that we partner with is scraping the company website for the website URL that you provided in the previous page. And it's essentially looking for a company logo and then a color scheme based off of the website. So we see here, we have primary dark color, accent color, link color. These are all things that you can edit if you would like. You can even change the logo. But if everything here looks good, you're actually just gonna wanna click on generate here at the bottom. And in doing so, we can see this loading screen show up and a couple of callouts as to what the AI is actually performing. So it's fetching the branding and the company info, once again, outside of some of the information that's shown here on the left. It's looking for pieces of information on your company website related to certain metrics that could be very pertinent. So, things like customer retention rate, or oftentimes for Matic and our tool, a very important metric is presentations generated. That's really showcasing some of the usage data. So in this step here, what AI is performing is a look through. And then after it's performed that look through, what it does is it inserts some helpful metrics here within this email template. So the numbers themselves are not populated according to any sort of data. They're just default values. But once again, this being sort of a starter template or a stepping off point, these can obviously be edited by you and other members of the team, of your data team perhaps. But yeah, this deal's closed, this time saved on content creation, prospect engagement rate, and data sources are all metrics, all different sort of data points that are relative or specific to Matic as a company. So really, really cool stuff. Kind of takes away the legwork related to having to speak with internal teams about maybe what would be most important to showcase. And then the rest of this information here is all editable utilizing a HTML builder. So you can change the font if you would like to something different. You can change the size of the text, all of that stuff. all of these pieces of information are editable as well. And then even down here, there's an opportunity to add, an unsubscribe link if you would like. If you wanted to edit this outside of the existing sort of information present here, all you would need to do is go to the left, and all of these modules are things that you can actually insert into the template itself. So let's say, I have a piece of information that I want to include, or two pieces of information perhaps that I want to include here at the top. I can put the columns section into the email body itself, and then essentially add, like an image to this module, and then maybe add some text to this module. So maybe there is some sort of logo that I want to include here, and then provide text on the right. All right. So I'm going to share my screen back to the PowerPoint presentation, or excuse me, the Google Slides presentation that I was going through. But a couple of key callouts there is that in creating that account to generate that end of year email template, you'll have access to that Matic account for 3 days, and you'll actually be able to take the HTML or download the HTML from the email template that you created and export it to whichever email platform that you and your company leverage. So definitely feel free to do that within that 3-day window, and then you can once again insert that into another email platform in order to retain the design of the email template you had generated for you through that exercise. All right, and then maybe you've heard all of this and thought, this is all great information. I would love to have a method or means of sending out some sort of email campaign to my customers within a specific segment, but my company doesn't currently today leverage an email platform. If that's the case, then Matic Mail, which is one of our offerings, might be the right fit for you. It provides everything that other email platforms do and a couple of key differentiators, namely the ability to connect to various data sources, be it BI tools, CRMs, data warehouses, and even spreadsheets. You can also send personalized PDF attachments to stand out and dive deeper, following once again in the theme of hyper-personalization. That's something that our Matic Mail offering is able to perform. There's also if-then logic to determine, if an email actually gets sent out to a specific customer or recipient based on some sort of back-end logic that you can provide. So really, really cool stuff there, making the process much easier, kind of moving once again into that run section. Maybe you're taking learnings from a specific segment that you're sending to based on your logic. And then lastly, creating personalized images, text, tables, charts, and even AI-powered insights. So these are all things that are possible with Matic Mail, and definitely is a way to make sure that your email campaigns are standing out and really sort of delivering that value narrative that I've been talking to throughout this presentation. All right, and with that, I wanted to open up the floor to Q&A. I just wanted to once again thank everybody for joining today's session. And if you do have any questions, feel free to place them into the chat. Both Bex and myself will be monitoring there, or you can also feel free to post them in the Q&A box within the Zoom toolbar.
Hey, Sheldon. So we got a couple questions. The first one is regarding that slide you had that showed the different, the spreadsheet, the Salesforce logos and all that. I don't know if you want to go back to that slide real quick.
Yes, give me one sec.
So the question was, as someone who is not super data savvy, what kind of data can you pull from these different sources? Like, what data usually lives where?
Yeah, great question, Bex. So a lot of sort of the account data we've found will reside in something like a Salesforce, a HubSpot, or a Gainsight. So sort of, I think it's important information to surface, but this is information that is a little bit more specific to the account themselves, how many seats they have, they have with your product, maybe the date of starting to work with the team or with your team. So that's where a lot of that information will reside. But in terms of like usage data or even ROI, kind of veering into that section, I would say the other section or the other sort of categories here really provide more of that information. So data warehouses specifically, oftentimes, a Redshift or a Snowflake, these house a lot of that usage data, and can be leveraged in a way to really pull some of that ROI if you're querying it in a certain fashion. So would definitely say, that's where a lot of that information is. CRMs like Looker and Tableau, these two in particular can be really, really great for when it comes to visualizations. So, if you're trying to export something or showcase something as maybe an image or a chart, to showcase maybe usage over a particular set of time, driving kind of ROI in that way. Looker and Tableau are great there. And then spreadsheets, a lot of our customers use spreadsheets to perform calculations within cells. So maybe they're exporting information from a data warehouse like Redshift or Snowflake, really, really rich sort of usage data metrics, and they're actually placing it into a spreadsheet and having calculations or formulas within specific cells to come out with an ROI calculation. So I would say spreadsheets are also a really, really great place to either create certain ROI calculations or source that kind of information.
Cool. The next question is around the email generator. Is it pulling metrics based on the content website?
Sorry, I'm just scrolling down to it. I'm sorry, Bex, would you mind repeating the question?
Yeah. The question, I'm going to reword it a little bit, is how is it figuring out what metrics we should be using?
Oh, yeah, good question. So the AI is essentially looking at your website. It's combing through it and it's looking for, basically clues as to what kinds of maybe product offerings your company has and maybe what service lines your company presents. And then it's using that information and sort of keywords based on, maybe the about page that a lot of company websites have to formulate a set of different metrics or variables that can be surfaced within the email template itself. So in a way, it's looking and it's sort of pulling and populating, but it's kind of doing multiple things. It's using context clues to figure out what would be best to populate within those sections in the email template. And in some cases, it's a direct pull and populate. In other cases, it's a little bit more nuanced than that.
And the last question we have is regarding the crawl, walk, run slide.
Oh, yes.
What you've seen, how does like an end of year review email differ in terms of like the actual content from like a monthly email?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, an end of year email, I think because it's coming on a more annual basis, you really can do a bit more when it comes to the information that you surface. And in some ways, it can be a lot more comprehensive. One of the things that I talked about early on in the presentation, but I didn't really come back to is the concept of fun and sort of imbuing that into your end of year email campaigns. I think that is something that you can particularly do with more of like an end of year campaign or end of year email format versus more of a monthly. Monthly is great. You can still really drive like certain narratives and provide certain value through those or through that frequency. But I think usually it's more so, hey, here's kind of some sort of metric or set of metrics over a period of time. And it's really sort of serving the value of helping your customer understand like, hey, this is how you're tracking in terms of certain metrics, on a month-to-month basis. For an end of year email campaign, it can almost veer into the realm of like celebration in the sense that, here's kind of a bird's eye view of all of the different things that we've been working on with you over the course of a year. And it's formatted in this really fun and exciting way. So you're still driving value and you're still getting in front of the eyes of account executives, but I would say it's almost kind of like a grander grander representation or a grander expression of metrics and data points and value, and can be done in like maybe more of a fun and exciting way than perhaps like a monthly one pager could. But
awesome. So that's it for all the questions. And I think it also works out because we're almost at time. Thanks so much, Sheldon, for joining. And thank you for all of our attendees for joining us as well today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure talking with all of you. And yeah, looking forward to seeing more end of year email campaigns in the future.